They say the devil is in the details. And as a 72-year-old retired accountant, I know how to find those details. I'm Richard Preston. And when my church's head deacon had me kicked off the finance committee for irregularities in my bookkeeping, I knew something wasn't right. My books were perfect. So what was Timothy really trying to hide? The answer started with a single line item: monthly payments to a youth organization that didn't exist. But following that thread led me into a web of lies, so complex it took months to unravel. Secret families, shell companies, predatory loans, and a conspiracy that threatened to destroy everything our congregation had built over 75 years. You're watching Betrayal HQ, where financial crimes meet moral justice. If you're new here, we share the real stories of fraud exposure and corruption takedowns, told by the people who fought back. Hit that subscribe button and notification bell, because Richard's methodical investigation reads like a crime thriller with a perfect ending. What I uncovered wasn't just embezzlement, it was a coordinated attack on our church's very existence. Timothy had put our building at risk, betrayed multiple families, and thought he could hide behind his position of trust. He was wrong, because there's nothing more dangerous than an accountant with a calculator and a moral compass. I sat in the basement meeting room of St. Catherine's Church, listening to the words that would change everything. Head Deacon Timothy stood at the front, his voice carrying that false concern I'd grown to recognize. Unfortunately, we've discovered some irregularities in the financial reporting, he said, not looking at me directly. The committee feels it's time for new leadership in the treasurer position. Irregularities. The word hung in the air like incense, heavy and suffocating. For 10 years, I'd managed every penny that came through this church. Collection plates, bake sale funds, memorial donations. I'd treated each dollar with the same precision I'd once applied to Fortune 500 accounts. The vote was swift. 8 hands raised against me, only 3 in my favor. The pitying stares from people I'd considered friends felt like physical blows. "Richard, we appreciate your years of service," Timothy said with a smile that never reached his eyes. I packed my ledger books in silence, my hands trembling slightly. This wasn't just about being voted out of a position. This was about my reputation, my integrity, everything I'd built in this community over 72 years. Back home, I couldn't let it go. The humiliation burned, but more than that, I knew my books were clean. I'd kept meticulous records, photocopies of everything stored in my home office. I spread the ledgers across my dining room table, running my finger down each column. Every entry balanced perfectly, every receipt accounted for. So what irregularities was Timothy talking about? Then I saw a recurring payment I'd questioned before, but Timothy had brushed off. A&Z Youth Outreach appeared every month for the past 6 months, always for exactly $2,847. I'd asked Timothy about it once. He'd said it was a new youth program the church was supporting, approved by the board before my time, but something felt wrong about it. The payments were always on the same date, always the same amount. In my 40-year accounting career, legitimate, charitable payments never looked this mechanical. I pulled out my laptop and opened a new spreadsheet. If Timothy wanted to question my methods, I'd show him what real financial investigation looked like. The next morning, I started with a simple Google search for A&Z Youth Outreach. Nothing. No website, no social media presence, no news articles about their work. For a youth organization receiving nearly $35,000 a year from our church, they had surprisingly little public visibility. I dug deeper, searching business registration databases. A&Z Youth Outreach was indeed a registered LLC, filed 8 months ago. The filing was bare minimum, just a name, a P.O. box address, and a registered agent named Angela Torres. The timing bothered me. Timothy had become head deacon exactly 10 months ago. The youth outreach payments started 2 months later. I grabbed my coat and drove to the address listed for the P.O. box. It was in a strip mall across town. Nothing but a mailbox service. No offices, no signs of youth programming. Walking back to my car, I felt that familiar tingle I used to get during audit season, the sense that numbers were hiding secrets. Timothy had made a mistake targeting me. He'd forgotten that I didn't just count money. I investigated it. The county clerk's office was my next stop. As a former CPA, I knew exactly which public records might contain useful information. I need to look up the LLC filing for A&Z Youth Outreach, I told the clerk. The file was thin, containing only the basic registration paperwork. But there it was, the registered agent's full information. Angela Torres, age 29, with a residential address in Maplewood Heights. I memorized the address and drove straight there. The house was modest but well-maintained, with children's toys scattered across the front yard. Sitting in my car across the street, I felt like a stalker. What was I doing? Following paper trails was one thing, but this felt like crossing a line. Then I saw Timothy's silver BMW pull into the driveway. My heart stopped. Timothy was married to Beatrice, and they lived on the other side of town. What was he doing here on a Wednesday afternoon? A woman answered the door. Young, attractive, with dark hair, she smiled warmly at Timothy, and two small children ran to greet him. They called him Daddy. Everything made sense now. The regular payments, the fake youth organization, the secrecy. Timothy wasn't just stealing church money. He was funding an entire second life. I drove home in a daze, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. This wasn't about financial irregularities in my bookkeeping. This was about covering up Timothy's embezzlement to support his secret family. But how deep did this go? If Timothy was bold enough to steal from the church for personal expenses, what else might he be hiding? I called my oldest friend, Franklin, a retired lawyer who'd helped me navigate various church legal issues over the years. Franklin, I need advice. Hypothetically, if someone discovered embezzlement at their church, what would be their obligation to report it? Richard Preston, what's going on? I told him everything. The vote, the suspicious payments, the house in Maplewood Heights. This isn't revenge, Richard Preston, Franklin said quietly. This is a fiduciary duty you never resigned from. The church members deserve to know their donations are being stolen. He was right. This was bigger than my wounded pride. Franklin agreed to help me investigate properly. We need to be methodical, he said. Accusations without ironclad proof will just make you look vindictive. We started with the church's public tax filings. As a religious organization, St. Catherine's had to file detailed financial reports with the state. What we found was alarming. Timothy had authorized a second mortgage on the church property 18 months ago, a fact that was never disclosed to the full committee or the congregation. Richard Preston, this doesn't make sense, Franklin said, studying the documents. The church's finances were stable when you were treasurer. Why would Timothy need to mortgage the property? The loan was for $400,000, supposedly for facility improvements and ministry expansion. But I couldn't think of any major improvements that had been made to the building. Who provided the loan? I asked. Franklin pointed to a name I didn't recognize. Heritage Holdings, LLC. Another shell company. Another thread to pull. We spent the afternoon tracing Heritage Holdings through business databases and property records. The trail was deliberately confusing, but Franklin's legal experience helped us navigate the maze of corporate filings. The truth about Heritage Holdings made my stomach turn. It wasn't a legitimate lending institution. It was owned by Marcus Steele, a commercial real estate developer who'd been trying to buy the land around our church for years. The pieces started falling into place. Timothy hadn't just been stealing money for his personal life. He was systematically putting the church into debt with someone who wanted our property. This is a land grab, Franklin said grimly. Timothy's setting the church up for default, so Steele can foreclose and acquire the property below market value. I thought about all the families who'd been married in that sanctuary, all the children baptized there, all the generations who'd built their spiritual home on that land. Timothy wasn't just betraying me personally. He was selling out the entire congregation. We needed more evidence, but I was starting to understand the scope of what we were facing. This wasn't simple embezzlement. This was a coordinated scheme to destroy the church I'd spent my whole life serving. Franklin, what if we can't stop this? We will, he said firmly. But we need help. You can't do this alone anymore. Asterisk, asterisk, I approached. Asterisk, asterisk. The only committee member I still trusted completely. Helen, who ran the church's charitable missions program. She'd always been honest and direct, never caught up in church politics. Helen, I need to show you something, but you have to promise me you'll keep an open mind. We met at a small cafe downtown, away from the church where Timothy might overhear. I showed her just the first page of our findings. The A and Z youth outreach payments, with no corresponding youth program. Helen's face went white as she read. Richard Preston? Are you sure about this? I've verified every detail. Helen, there's more. Much more. I told her about the secret family, the suspicious mortgage, the connection to Marcus Steele. With each revelation, Helen looked more horrified. What do we do? I need you to help me document everything we can access through official church channels. Timothy's been careful, but he can't hide everything. Helen agreed, but I could see the fear in her eyes. Taking on the head deacon was dangerous for someone who depended on the church community for their social connections. The next morning, she called me, panicked. Richard Preston, Timothy knows we met. He confronted me about spreading rumors. I'm scared. Timothy cornered me in the church parking lot after Sunday service. His usual fake smile was gone, replaced by barely controlled anger. Richard Preston, I hear you've been spreading lies about me and the church's finances. I haven't said anything that isn't true. You need to be very careful about making accusations you can't prove. Elderly people sometimes get confused about complex financial matters. The condescension in his voice made my blood boil, but I kept my expression neutral. Timothy, I've been managing finances longer than you've been alive. I think I can handle reading a bank statement. Maybe that's the problem. Maybe it's time for fresh thinking instead of outdated methods. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. Drop whatever conspiracy theories you're cooking up, Richard Preston. You've already embarrassed yourself enough. As he walked away, I realized Helen wasn't the only one in danger. Timothy was getting desperate, which made him unpredictable. That afternoon, I found a typed note on my windshield. Old men should enjoy their retirement quietly. Stop asking questions that don't concern you. It wasn't directly threatening, but the message was clear. To throw Timothy off our investigation, Franklin suggested a strategic retreat. You need to make him think he's won, Franklin advised. Let him get comfortable while we finish gathering evidence. The next Sunday, I made a show of publicly apologizing to Timothy after the service. I want to say I'm sorry for being stubborn about the treasurer transition, I announced to several congregation members within Timothy's hearing. Maybe it is time for an old man to step back and enjoy retirement. Timothy's smug smile told me the performance was working. That's very gracious of you, Richard Preston. I'm sure you'll find retirement much more peaceful. I even announced that I was taking a break from regular church attendance, claiming I needed time to adjust to my new circumstances. For the next 2 weeks, I stayed away from Street Catherine's completely. But Franklin and I weren't resting. We were compiling the complete dossier. The evidence was overwhelming. Fraudulent LLC payments totaling nearly $50,000, the predatory mortgage scheme, documentation of Timothy's secret family, and the connection to Marcus Steele's real estate ambitions. Everything was legally obtained from public records. Timothy couldn't claim we'd hacked or stolen anything. While I was supposedly in retirement, Franklin and I discovered something that changed everything. Timothy had scheduled a special board meeting for the following week to vote on selling the church's antique pipe organ. Emergency cash flow requirements? According to the agenda Helen secretly shared with me, the organ was worth at least $150,000 and had been donated by a founding family in 1962. Selling it would break the hearts of longtime members who remembered its dedication ceremony. He's accelerating the timeline, Franklin realized. Something's making him desperate to extract more money quickly. We also learned that Beatrice, Timothy's wife, had been asking questions around town. She'd discovered some inconsistencies in their family finances and was starting to investigate on her own. Richard Preston, I think we need to approach Beatrice directly, Franklin suggested. That could destroy their marriage. Timothy's lies are going to destroy it anyway. At least this way, she has a chance to protect herself legally. I wrestled with the decision for days. Exposing Timothy's crimes was one thing, but deliberately breaking up his marriage felt like crossing a moral line. Then Helen called with urgent news. Timothy had moved up the organ vote to this coming Tuesday. We were out of time. Franklin drafted a formal letter requesting a special meeting of the full parish council. According to the church's bylaws, any 3 current or former committee members could petition for such a meeting with 48 hours' notice. Helen signed immediately. Getting a third signature was harder. Most committee members were either loyal to Timothy or afraid to oppose him. Finally, Marcus Wright, the elderly head of the maintenance committee, agreed to sign. He'd been suspicious of some of Timothy's facility management decisions. "Something's not right about how he handles money," Marcus told me quietly. "I've been doing maintenance here for 20 years, and I've never seen spending patterns like this." We delivered the petition Monday morning. Timothy couldn't refuse. The bylaws were clear. I spent Monday night preparing presentation packets for each council member. Charts, documentation, timeline of events, copies of all relevant public records. Everything organized with the precision that had made me successful in corporate accounting. Franklin reviewed my work one final time. "Richard Preston, this is bulletproof. Timothy won't be able to talk his way out of this." Tuesday morning, I woke up before dawn, too nervous to sleep. After 72 years, I was about to take the biggest risk of my life. The council meeting was held in the church library, with all 12 members present. Timothy arrived, confident and smiling, clearly expecting to easily defeat whatever challenge I was mounting. "I appreciate Richard Preston's continued passion for church affairs," he began, "but I hope this won't take long. We have important business to conduct today." I stood up slowly, my hands steadier than I'd expected. "Thank you all for coming. I won't waste your time with long speeches. I'll let the evidence speak for itself." I began distributing the presentation packets, watching faces change as members started reading. The room fell completely silent, except for the sound of turning pages. Timothy's confident smile faded as he saw the first page, the A&Z Youth Outreach payment records, with Angela Torres's address clearly highlighted. "This is ridiculous," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Richard Preston's obviously bitter about being removed from his position. Helen spoke up from across the room. "Timothy, can you explain what youth programs A&Z Outreach provides for our church?" It's a partnership program. Youth mentoring in underserved communities. "Then you can provide documentation of their activities?" Timothy's face was getting red. "I don't have to justify every ministry decision to this committee." Marcus Wright cleared his throat. "Actually, Timothy, expenditures over $1,000 require committee approval according to our bylaws. We never voted on these payments." The room erupted as council members started asking questions simultaneously. Timothy tried to maintain control, but the evidence was overwhelming. "The mortgage documents show you borrowed $400,000 without disclosure," said Patricia, our oldest council member. "Where did that money go? Facility improvements that were desperately needed?" "What improvements?" Marcus interrupted. "I maintain this building. Nothing worth $400,000 has been done here." I watched Timothy's composure cracking as the council pressed for answers he couldn't provide. Then the library door opened quietly, and Beatrice walked in. Timothy went white. "Beatrice, what are you doing here?" "Helen called me," she said simply. "She thought I should hear this." Beatrice sat down without another word, but her presence changed everything. Timothy couldn't dismiss the accusations as lies when his own wife was listening. "The payments to A&Z Youth Outreach," I continued, "were sent to an address where Timothy has been maintaining a second household with Angela Torres and their 2 children. The silence was deafening. Beatrice's face showed no emotion, but her hands were trembling. "These are lies," Timothy said desperately. "Richard Preston's fabricating evidence to get revenge. Everything here is from public records," Franklin said, speaking for the first time. "County clerk filings, property records, state business registrations. Nothing has been fabricated." Patricia stood up slowly, her voice shaking with anger. "Timothy, I've been a member of this church for 47 years. I helped raise the money for that organ you want to sell. How dare you steal from us?" Other council members began voicing their outrage. But Timothy wasn't listening anymore. He was staring at Beatrice, who hadn't said a word since entering the room. I can explain everything." "Can you?" she asked quietly. "Can you explain the diamond necklace receipt I found in your jacket? For a jewelry store I've never been to?" Timothy's last defense crumbled. He'd been buying gifts for Angela with church money while telling his wife they couldn't afford a vacation. "I move for Timothy's immediate suspension as head deacon pending a full investigation," Helen said formally. "Seconded," said Marcus. The vote was unanimous, 11 in favor, with Timothy abstaining. "This meeting is over," Timothy said, standing abruptly. "No," Patricia said firmly. "This meeting is just beginning. Sit down, Timothy. We're calling the police." Within an hour, detectives arrived to begin a formal investigation. The real estate deal with Marcus Steele was voided due to fraudulent representation. Timothy's elaborate scheme collapsed in a single afternoon. The parish council met again the following Sunday to address the aftermath. The mood was somber but determined. "We owe Richard Preston a sincere apology," Patricia said to open the meeting, "and we need to discuss how to prevent this from happening again." The council unanimously voted to reinstate me not just to the finance committee, but as its permanent chairman with expanded oversight authority. My first official act was working with the church lawyer to restructure our debt and secure the building's future. The $400,000 mortgage would be difficult, but manageable with proper financial planning. "We're going to implement new transparency measures," I announced. "Monthly financial reports to the full congregation, quarterly audits, and no expenditure over $500 without committee approval." Helen raised her hand. "What about the classed youth programs? We do need to support young people in our community." "We'll establish a real youth outreach program," I said, "with proper oversight and documented activities. We'll do what Timothy pretended to be doing." The church would survive this crisis, but it would take time to rebuild trust within the congregation. Many members felt betrayed and angry that Timothy had manipulated their faith for personal gain. 2 months later, I was reviewing the quarterly financial reports when Helen knocked on my office door. "Richard Preston, there's someone here to see you." A young woman with 2 small children stood in the hallway. I recognized her immediately. "Angela Torres." "Mr. Richard Preston?" "I'm Angela. I wanted to thank you." I invited her into the office, unsure what to expect. "I know what you probably think of me," she began, "but I had no idea Timothy was married. He told me he was divorced, that the church job was temporary until his business took off." She explained how Timothy had gradually isolated her from friends and family, making her financially dependent on him. When everything came out, I realized I'd been as much a victim as anyone else. The church money he spent on us, I had no idea where it came from. Angela had left Timothy immediately after his arrest and moved back with her parents in another state. "You didn't just save the church," she said quietly. "You saved me and my children from a man who was living a lie." I found myself oddly moved by her gratitude. Timothy's victims weren't just the church members. They included this young woman and her children who'd been deceived just as thoroughly as the rest of us. The criminal trial took place 8 months later. I testified about the financial evidence Franklin and I had uncovered, presenting our findings in the same methodical way I'd once used for corporate audits. Timothy's defense attorney tried to paint me as a vindictive old man seeking revenge, but the evidence was too clear. Bank records, property documents, witness testimony from Angela. Everything confirmed our investigation. The prosecutor called it one of the most systematic cases of religious fraud he'd seen in 20 years of practice. Timothy was sentenced to 5 years in prison and ordered to pay full restitution to the church. His assets, including his house, were seized to help cover the stolen money. Beatrice had filed for divorce immediately after the council meeting. She kept their shared home and received half of Timothy's legitimate assets, but she also testified against him during the trial. "I feel like I never knew the man I was married to," she said on the witness stand. "Everything about our life together was built on lies. Marcus Steele The real estate developer also faced charges for his role in the predatory lending scheme. The prosecutor argued that he'd knowingly participated in Timothy's plan to force the church into default. 1 year after Timothy's arrest, Street Catherine's was thriving again. Our finances were transparent and stable, with detailed monthly reports posted on the bulletin board for any member to review. We'd established a genuine youth outreach program, working with local schools to provide tutoring and mentorship for at-risk teenagers. The irony wasn't lost on me that Timothy's fake charity had inspired us to create something real and beneficial. Helen had been elected as our new head deacon, bringing her experience in charitable work to the leadership role. "Richard Preston, I need to ask you something," she said after one of our committee meetings. "Would you consider training a backup treasurer? Someone who can learn your methods?" I'd been thinking about succession planning myself. At 73, I couldn't handle the church finances forever. I'd like to recommend Patricia's granddaughter, Caroline. She just graduated with an accounting degree and needs practical experience. Perfect. We'll set up a mentorship program. Training Caroline reminded me why I'd fallen in love with accounting in the first place. The satisfaction of making numbers tell true stories, of protecting organizations from financial harm. The Sunday service, marking the first anniversary of Timothy's exposure, was particularly meaningful. Pastor Williams spoke about redemption, forgiveness, and the strength that comes from facing difficult truths. "This congregation has been through a trial that tested our faith," he said, "but we've emerged stronger because we chose transparency over comfortable lies." After the service, many members approached me personally to express their gratitude. Some admitted they'd initially doubted my accusations because Timothy had seemed so trustworthy. "You saved our church," said Mrs. Thompson, an elderly widow whose late husband had helped build the sanctuary in 1954. "My Henry would be so grateful that someone fought to protect this place." I received dozens of similar comments, but one conversation stood out particularly. A young man I didn't recognize approached me hesitantly. "Mr. Richard Preston? I'm Angela's brother, Miguel. I wanted to thank you for exposing Timothy's lies. My sister and her kids are doing much better now. She's back in school, studying to become a teacher. Learning that our actions had positive effects beyond just saving the church made all the stress and conflict worthwhile." Carolyn proved to be an excellent student, quickly mastering the detailed record-keeping systems I'd developed over the years. "Mr. Richard Preston, how did you first suspect something was wrong with Timothy's financial management?" she asked during one of our training sessions. "Experience teaches you to notice patterns," I explained. "Legitimate expenses rarely look as mechanical as those A and Z youth outreach payments." I was teaching her not just accounting procedures, but the investigative mindset that had served me throughout my career. "Always remember that numbers tell stories. Your job is to make sure those stories are true." Caroline's fresh perspective also helped us modernize some of our systems. She suggested implementing digital record-keeping alongside our paper files, creating backup systems that would make future fraud much harder to hide. "What if we required 2 signatures on all checks over $100, she proposed, "and monthly reviews by the full committee instead of quarterly?" Her suggestions were practical and forward-thinking. The church's financial management would be stronger than ever when I eventually stepped down. Franklin, who'd become our unofficial legal advisor, approved all the new oversight measures. "Timothy succeeded because he concentrated too much power in one position," he observed. "These checks and balances will prevent that from happening again." 2 years after the crisis, I received an unexpected visitor. Timothy's former wife, Beatrice, asked to meet with me privately. "Richard Preston, I owe you an apology," she said when we sat down in the church library. "When you first made those accusations, I thought you were being vindictive. I defended Timothy because I couldn't believe my husband was capable of such deception." "Beatrice, you don't owe me anything. You were as much a victim as anyone else. But I was willfully blind to signs I should have noticed. The unexplained absences, the financial inconsistencies, his defensive attitude when I asked questions. She'd spent the past 2 years in therapy, working through the trauma of discovering that her 20-year marriage had been built on systematic lies. "I've learned to trust my instincts again," she said. "And I wanted to tell you that what you did took tremendous courage. You risked everything to protect something you loved." Beatrice had also started a support group for other people who'd been victims of financial fraud, particularly within religious organizations. "It's more common than people realize," she explained. "Criminals target religious communities because people there want to trust their leaders." Her work was helping other victims find their voices and seek justice. The church celebrated its 75th anniversary 3 years after Timothy's conviction. The celebration was particularly meaningful because we'd not only survived his fraud, but had grown stronger as a community. During the anniversary service, Pastor Williams asked me to address the congregation about our financial recovery. 3 years ago, this church faced a crisis that threatened its very existence, I began. "We learned that someone we trusted had betrayed that trust in the most fundamental way." I looked out at the familiar faces, people I'd known for decades, young families who'd joined during our rebuilding period, and longtime members who'd weathered the storm with dignity. But we also learned something important about ourselves. When faced with difficult truths, this congregation chose transparency over comfortable denial. We chose to confront problems rather than ignore them. The church was in better financial shape than it had been in years. Our membership had actually grown as word spread about our commitment to transparency and accountability. The systems we've put in place ensure that no one person can ever again put this institution at risk. But more importantly, we've proven that a community built on truth is stronger than one built on lies. Caroline officially took over as head treasurer on my 75th birthday, though I remained as an advisor and oversight committee chair. "Are you sure you're ready to trust someone else with the books?" Helen teased during the transition ceremony. "Caroline knows these systems better than I did at her age," I replied truthfully. "The church's finances are in excellent hands." My retirement celebration was held in the same basement meeting room where Timothy had once humiliated me. The irony wasn't lost on anyone present. Richard Preston showed us that standing up for what's right sometimes requires personal sacrifice, Pastor Williams said in his remarks. He risked his reputation and relationships to protect something bigger than himself. Franklin spoke about our investigation, describing how my accounting skills had been crucial to unraveling Timothy's complex fraud scheme. Richard Preston turned a personal betrayal into a mission to save his church, Franklin said. "That's the definition of grace under pressure." The congregation presented me with a plaque reading, "In appreciation of Richard Preston's faithful stewardship and courageous service to St. Catherine's Church." But the most meaningful gift was seeing the church thriving, its future secure through transparent and honest financial management. 5 years later, I still attend Sunday services regularly and help Caroline with complex accounting questions. The church has become a model for financial transparency, with other congregations asking to learn from our oversight systems. Timothy was released from prison after serving 4 years of his sentence. I heard through Franklin that he'd moved to another state and was working in construction. Angela had finished her teaching degree and remarried, creating a stable life for her children. Sometimes I wonder if there was another way to handle the situation, some approach that could have prevented the pain his fraud caused to so many people. But Franklin always reminds me that exposing the truth was the only ethical choice. "You couldn't let him continue stealing from people who trusted him," he says. "And you couldn't let him destroy the church to enrich himself and his co-conspirators." The investigation had ripple effects beyond St. Catherine's. Marcus Steele's real estate company was investigated for similar predatory lending schemes, leading to reforms in how religious organizations manage debt. Last month, I received a letter from a treasurer at a Baptist church in Ohio. They'd read about our case and used our transparency procedures to uncover embezzlement by their own financial administrator. "Your story gave us the courage to ask difficult questions," the letter read. "Thank you for showing that ordinary people can stand up to corruption when they're willing to do the work." At 77, I've found a new purpose in sharing what we learned, helping other religious communities protect themselves from financial predators who exploit faith for personal gain. The calculator and moral compass that helped me bring down Timothy continue serving a larger mission, ensuring that institutions built on trust remain worthy of that trust. If Richard's church finance investigation satisfied you, tomorrow's story will shock you even more. Meet the elderly man whose stepdaughter forged his signature to steal his stocks, so he used his last shareholder vote to bankrupt her partner's company. Tomorrow's story: my stepdaughter forged my signature to get my stocks, so I used my last shareholder vote to bankrupt her partner's company. What happened next proves that sometimes the best revenge is perfectly legal and devastatingly effective. Subscribe and hit that bell, because tomorrow's corporate betrayal gets exactly the justice it deserves. See you at Betrayal HQ.